Hey, why don't you come back to my place and check out my copy of Sandman Volume 3, Season of Mist? Okay, that was probably a bad choice given how cancelled that is. But I'll tell you what's not cancelled. My mum said I could watch it. See, like and subscribe. 1993, Tony Scott, True Romance. For those, Tom, who haven't seen the film, it's story of Kevin Smithsonian Institute frat house frog brother, played by Christian Slater, um, melandering through his slacker 20s in the 90s as one could in a video store. Uh, he finds himself in a fantastic one night stand with Alabama, buxom, beautiful blonde, who it transpires his manager hired for him because he seemed kind of lonely. She is, in fact, a prostitute. From here is a series of happenstance and kismet as he goes on a crime of what should start as pettily violent encounters into escalating body counts as they both try and flee from her pimp with the drugs that the pimp had from the mafia don, with the Hollywood actor who also knows the producer, which then, of course, ports the local police. All gun happy men. So it's the last hour of a gun happy man show of shouty gun happy as happiness ensues with guns. Um, Through it, we get some kismet, we get a lot of pop culture dialogue, we get a lot of grandstanding, we get a great signature piece, which can only be said as the writer's a white boy wanking in the corner. Um, until they live scot free, not to be confused with the Jack Kirby Miracle Man, who is much more better than the Mobius Miracle Man. Yes, that's the kind of line we're talking about here. This film's a bit more of a cut above the films I normally take. This did have theatrical release after all. It was Tony Scott. 1993, though, it's a weird film to come back to. I have not watched this film since I watched the film. It's been alluded to, and you can see there's a weird nexus sort of Tarantini-verse here, with you see actors who will go on to be in his other films, and actors who've been in other Tony Scott films on almost part of that Tarantino land. Ultimately, though, when I think about watching it in 1993, 94, so I was probably going to Blockbuster and just hoping they didn't ask me at this juncture, is it is a very much a 90s lad fantasy. However, I'd completely forgotten about the sort of supernatural Elvis in this. It does emphasize some sort of awareness that Slater's character is in the Travis Bickle mold, quite unhinged. His story with his dad shows you a sort of better, like, I never did this, I never did that, I never complained about this, implying his dad was a pretty shitty dad, whereas still his dad's the one who's bailing him out and can't really have been that bad of a guy. It's weird though watching it now. On the one hand, the stuff that really stuck out to me is the ensemble nature of it, is the way that his lies seem to escalate and get copped onto by so many different stratas. It's not just about Pimp's retinue, it is also about the Hollywood retinue, it is also about the mobster retinue, and then it is also about the cops retinue, all amassing around this suitcase of cocaine, which really could have been played in a bawdy Whitehall comedy way. The way people are just walking in and rooms, out of rooms, just missing each other while finding little notes on the doors. That I find really could have been played, and Tony Scott would have had the credentials for it, in a much more noises off kind of way. However, it does make me think about where I was at 17, 18. I never really, in fact, I never revisited this film. I think came down to the fact that while I did end up working those jobs, sort of saunter drifted into them. They were sort of an ad hoc default in the late 90s for a guy like myself. You postgraduate, you don't necessarily have the cultural capital or the social connections to get yourself into like the Guardian or a BBC apprenticeship scheme. I'm not bitter about that at all. I'm quite happy to watch AI eat them all alive. But you would find yourself in my case, my mate Pat got me a job in Game Station. Or you get a job in Waterstones. I worked in a comic showcase. All of these jobs sort of drifted towards the sort of limbo men, such as Slater plays here, and I was myself. However, by the time I did those jobs, everything had moved on. It was not the 90s, it was the noughties. And if anything, if I'm the Rob of any of these stores, I am played by John Cusack in High Fidelity. Um, the politics of this, Alabama also, I would say, while largely being the object, at least gets a decent fight with the soprano himself, James Gandolfini. That I felt was actually quite brutal. It was quite redemptive in a way. It just elevated her and her own shock in it. His own surprise at the violence he does. It it really emphasizes a certain innocence. They're doing these things, having watched these films, but once the consequences in front of them, they do poop their pants. The Mickey and Mallory knocks of it, the snide cops who just want to showboat and get the credit of it, as well as the showboating that is Hollywood producing. It is all done in quite a comical way, but it's more of an askance. It really is largely a crime drama. I totally recommend checking it out. Although I will say, I think one of the main reasons I haven't come back to it is also the bits that are most one of the scenes that is most applauded. There's a Sicilian scene. Don't really want to breathe on it too much because again the actors are doing what they're given and being Hopper and Walken, they play it to the hilt. It's the theory, history, fake news, whatever you will, about the origin of Sicilian ethnicity. Ultimately, though, while watching two actors, and yeah, I am totally aware that there's a certain woke lord element in me because I've been quite happy to watch a guy shoot a white rasta, albeit being Gary Oldman, so that's all right because he's a Cockney, and just a prostitute suddenly fall in love after 3 dates and a pretty woman. I've got no objections to any of that. Yeah, I've got an objection to this speech. I think my main objection isn't the racism. Racism is going to be part of crime. Uh, there's no point kicking around that. It's the fact that just the whole thing itself just comes down to the writer wanking in a corner. Some sort of rationale to get away with this petty play because there's a whole load of other scenes that could have been put in there in that dialogue that I think would have been equally effective, but he went for that, which just reeks of. And I was just saying, white boy wanking in the corner scene. The players themselves are great, but the dialogue puts me off. But then again, I'm not put off by watching loads of guns go off. The other thing I'd mention here is that the violence is violent. It's, I know that sounds funny, but you do get a sense of brutality, fear, and pain. And I think that there's a lot of films which will do way more in terms of cowboys and Indians of these scenes than this does. It's not without a certain flair and chung chung in time to the beats, but it is still about consequence, violence, and pain. And fear on the perpetrators as much as anything else. So, would I check it out? If you have not seen the film, I'd say yes. Yes, you're doing yourself a disservice not to check it out. Uh, my reservations going back to it are: was it the 90s? Nah, there's something still a bit, even by those standards, just more Arrested Development angst fest with Christian, but the story holds up. Every character is played by an actor. There are no bit parts in it, and that alone, you do go along for the funfare of it, and there is literally one in the film. So, to conclude, True Romance, has it aged over time? Marginally. Because ultimately, boy meets girl, girl was a hooker, boy frees girl from the oppression, girl turns out to be able to get a massive suitcase of cocaine, and they live happily ever after. Isn't really a bad one to aspire to. And with that, I bid you adieu.